Good evening and welcome to our August Dirigo Labs speaker series. My name is Jeff Frank. I'm the program manager here at Dirigo Labs. Tonight we'll be talking with Katie Shorey, the Director of Engagement at Live and Work Maine. And thank you, Katie, for taking your time. We're going to talk a little bit about Katie's background, the work she does, and the future of work in Maine. So thank you for coming and help us by thinking up some questions for later on. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks for being here.
Now, getting to know your background, you spent quite a bit of time in Washington, D.C. in public service and nonprofit work, running START, Emily List, a fellowship in the U.S. Senate, a partnership for public service. Can you walk us through that journey? I know it was a while ago, and that career path, and what skills from that period turned out to be most transferable to economic development work?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Shorey. It's so nice to be here. I grew up in a really small town in western rural Maine called Sweden. If anyone's been to the Freiburg Fair, you've probably gone by it. So I went to Freiburg Academy, went to St. Lawrence in upstate New York. And while I was there was, I went in thinking I was going to study biology. Hard pivot, ended up in political science. With that, I was very involved in student government. I heard about this really neat program in DC called Transforming Communities. And just, if I had even known what it was going to foreshadow with my life, I wouldn't have had any idea that you could even go into the work of economic development. But that essentially is what this entire program was. It was all about how forces at the local, state, and national level all impact community. So at the time, we studied neighborhoods within Washington, D.C. that were going through tremendous gentrification. So neighborhoods that I lived in, even now, have totally transformed from predominantly Black individuals to now just uber wealthy. But at the time, we looked at housing developments. There were a lot of areas in D.C. that were trying to build regular housing and then affordable housing, Section 8 housing. There's all of these different policies that they were experimenting with in DC. So we were studying that. If anyone's ever read the book Bowling Alone, there's this concept of back in the day, people used to get together, community, they would go to bowling nights. And then when there was just this shift in how people sort of showed up in community, and that's why a lot of the bowling alleys closed. People weren't coming together and doing things. And so you see there's a lot of towns in Maine, from Waterville, Biddeford, Lisbon, Lewiston, Auburn, where I live, where you've seen sort of this decline, but now we're seeing community come back up. So we'll touch on that later, but this is where all of this started for me. I was totally taken by these concepts of community, and that you could work at an organization or a nonprofit that offered a program that then served a population. So those organizations that you mentioned that I worked for in DC, it was to try to elect women to office, specifically under the age of 40, nonpartisan at the time. In 2008, 9, 10, there weren't that many women under the age of 40 running for office. And then I worked for a very, very partisan organization, Emily's List. But that was just such interesting learning of how you inject money very early on in a campaign and what that can do for a candidate. And then the Partnership for Public Service, I would say, really set me on the path of coalition building, which I'm happy to talk about. I have a lot of thoughts on that. But Partnership for Public Service was a nonprofit that tried to get more people to consider going into government, working in government. There was also a program within the partnership called the Center for Government Leadership, and it took government workers. It didn't matter what department, could have been Health and Human Services, State Department, Forest Service, put them through this training module and help them become better leaders. And so I was just a measly little program associate at the time, but I got to see how they built out this leadership program and brought the private sector, nonprofit sector, and public sector together.
And in the Senate?
The Senate, I worked for, this was actually I had a friend who worked for Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and she took over. I don't know if you all remember, but there was when Hillary Clinton got the Secretary of State position, she had an open seat.
Mm.
And so they had a special election. Kirsten Gillibrand came in, and all of a sudden she had just been a very no-name person, and then all of a sudden had taken over Hillary's office. And I was a fellow on in her office for a bit of time. So that got me running around the halls of Capitol Hill, and you just realize that, like, oh, all of these campaigns and offices are run by 20, 30-year-olds. But yeah, it was a very fun experience to be in DC for a good chunk of time.
Yeah. Absolutely. We might have been there at the same time. And what year did you decide to come back to Maine, and what was some of your thought process around coming back to your home state?
Do you want the professional story or the real story?
Well, how about a mix of both?
Okay. So I had been living in San Francisco for a year. I had this very funky job at the time. There was this group called the Center for Safe Internet Pharmacies that came out of this initiative that the White House wanted to start. And you might be asking yourselves, what does internet pharmacies have to do with anything? Let's put it this way. Back in 2010, 11, 12, a lot of stuff online was fake, and people were getting duped left and right. It could be from like buying a fake handbag or fake medicines. And this really started with like the Viagra issue. Like, people were getting duped with fake Viagra. So these pharma companies had to come together and be like, we need to protect consumers. But the consumers were finding all this information from the tech companies. So ads on Google, ads on Facebook, their credit cards were getting stolen. So MasterCard, Visa, Amex, we had to get all of these tech companies to come together to make sure that their platforms were safe from illegal online pharmacies. So this was another example in like coalition building.
Yeah.
And okay, like, we had to make something out of nothing, which has sort of become a theme of my life. But these tech companies, Google and Microsoft normally did not play well together, but for this purpose or this initiative, they had to. So, we got them together. They were on an advisory board. We had we did a lot of marketing campaigns, consumer education campaigns, and for a chunk of time, I ended up just working out of San Francisco because that's where some of our partners were. And I met someone. I was dating someone out there, and the relationship went up in a fiery ball of flames. And I decided, it was summer in Maine, 2016, and I had a remote job before it was cool to have a remote job. And so I said, I'm going to just go home for the summer and go back to the Lakes region. And that is when I briefly moved in with my parents, thinking I was either going to go back to DC or maybe try out Boston, because I'd never lived in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And then on TV, that is when I saw for the first time Maine Startup and Create Week. So that is how I realized that there was something going on in Maine. I had no idea, because I was one of those young people who grew up in the state. The adults around me, my parents, my teachers, they encouraged me to leave. That was the narrative. There's nothing here for you. You can't, you got to get out to move on up. I do think that has changed since that time. Truly, that is what Live and Work in Maine is all about. I know we will get to that, but I saw on TV that there was a startup conference. And so I said to myself, that is cool. I'm going to go to that. I can't afford the ticket, but I'm going to volunteer. So I go to this conference. I volunteer. At the time, it was this 5-day thing. I found a friend who I could crash on their couch in Portland. I volunteered every day, met a ton of people, learned all about different companies that were in Maine and growing in Maine. This is the first time I had ever heard of WEX, Unum. And I was like, there is something happening here, and I want to be part of this. And I made a very impulsive decision. My mother cannot even believe it to this day, but I signed an apartment lease at the end of that conference week, and I moved to Maine.
It's fantastic.
Yes. So that was my comeback to Maine.
Literally attracted you back to the state, and now you help design it so that it's attracted you back to the state.
Exactly.
And then you spend a little time at WEX?
Briefly was at WEX. Yeah, it was it was a brand new job. It was called the Innovation Program Manager. So for those who don't know about WEX, but they have 3 business lines: fleet, so the back end of HSA, and another travel element. They were trying to think of if we are going to make sure that we diversify our offerings. What other sectors should we maybe consider getting into? And so they had a new innovation team that stood up. And so I was the innovation program manager. This was 2019, right before COVID. And honestly, the timing just worked out for me because I got the offer to be hire number 2 at Live and Work in Maine. And so I left WEX. I left a very well paid, golden handcuff job. Luckily, I hadn't been there very long, but I couldn't work at a corporation when I had such a passion for this mission organization. Mm-hmm. And so I pivoted and I went back into the nonprofit world.
You know, I did read in a past interview that you had said while you were at WEX that you learned a lot about how an organization can integrate innovation into its design. Like you said, they have the 3 different sectors and an innovative company by nature. And did that teach you anything about how a young startup, a company in this room, can integrate regular innovation cycles into their designs without having to have an innovation director or a dedicated effort?
I think, and at the time we were literally building the plane as we were flying it. So at the time when we were building that innovation department, we were like, let's bring the startups in one after another, one after another, one after another. Just have conversations with them, see if there is any potential partnership opportunity, or if they're missing a solution, maybe we could build it or work on it. So I think at that point it was a lot of listening that the corporations were able, that WEX as a corporation was able to instill. What has bothered me in the Maine's entrepreneurial community is that there's not a lot of risk from corporations to I would essentially be the first customer for a startup.
Right.
There are a few, I don't know if I'm allowed to give an example, but there's a startup that is going to be piloting something with Unum, and getting it from conversation to actually an MOU or an SOW, like coming to action, takes way longer than I would like. So I think that is one of the downfalls. I wish there was a bigger appetite for startups to be able to at least have their product tried out in the corporate setting, because then companies would, they could have a customer early on.
Is there a good way to think of doing it? Would be grants for paid pilots to like subsidize the cost of letting the young company prove their value, or?
Yeah, I think I'd have to give that some thought. I'd be curious what the company feels like the risk is. I mean, maybe it's that they have a supplier or a vendor that they think, okay, we can't get rid of this. Mm-hmm. Could they carve out a piece to pilot or try inside, so that a company, if they have an offering, they could at least experiment with it? I'd be curious is it a cost thing? Is it a risk of, is it just the contracts are too long? I wonder where the breakdown happens. Mm-hmm. But I've heard that a lot from the startups, that they don't feel like they can find customers in Maine as easily as they can elsewhere.
Got it. So you walk into your boss's office and you say, I'm going to quit and going to go work for this nonprofit that, well, it's not really a nonprofit yet. I'm the second person there.
Yep.
And they close the door. They say, well, good. She was crazy anyway. So she must have been.
Yep.
Now you're coming into Maine Startup and Create Week. And
Live and Work in Maine.
Right. But at the time.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes.
Maine Startup and Create Week. And you rebranded it, restructured it, and it was as a 501c3.
Yep.
Reworked the format. Can you talk us through that operational cycle, how some of those decisions were made, and walk us through those first months and year? So
for many years, I was wearing 2 hats. I was always running Maine Startup and Create Week over here, and then at one point I worked at a bank, People's United Bank, then I was at WEX, and then Live and Work in Maine. So I always had that stable W-2 job, and then I was running Maine Startup and Create Week. There was a situation that happened. I would put it in the category of a Me Too situation. And the person who was at the time running the organization had to be removed. And I was put up to be the leader at that time. Mm-hmm. And it had not been something that I had planned. I did not think I would ever run the organization, but at the time, I think because I was doing all the fundraising, which was a whole new skill that I had developed, I had all these interactions with the employers and the people I was asking for money. And if we were going to continue to succeed, we needed those relationships to be strong, and I was the person doing that. We decided it was a lesson in PR, absolutely. So we had one-on-one direct conversations with all the employers, told them what we were concerned about, how we were going to fix things, mitigate risk, what we were going to offer and do. And forming a nonprofit was for a variety of reasons. One, it gave us an official board. We had bylaws that we would adhere to. We got directors and officers insurance, which is also a safeguard. And we, at the time, had been around all volunteer for 4 or 5 years. Yeah, 4 years. And we weren't just a week anymore. We didn't want to just be Maine Startup and Create Week. We wanted to do stuff around the state throughout the year. So we didn't need to be called that anymore. And so that was a really good time to do a marketing rebrand. There we go. So that's really how that all came to be. And I've been very fortunate that while I was at Live and Work in Maine, they were super flexible with letting me wear both hats. Mm-hmm. But I always like to say that growing Maine's entrepreneurial ecosystem intentionally is one talent attraction angle. We need to grow. Everyone else might want to know that we have good, solid corporate jobs. People might want to work for government, municipalities, you name it, typical jobs. But then knowing that we have a very robust startup community, having both of those things makes a very attractive place to live. So I think growing Maine's entrepreneurial ecosystem was just a focal area of the Live and Work in Maine story.
That's an interesting point that you don't hear enough, that the attraction for employees is also having a variety of size and scale and shape of companies that can fit whatever people might need in that point.
And they also want to know that, okay, if I work at a startup and I take a leap of faith and go work over here in this industry, what's my fallback plan? We used to say it for people who even for people who work at Maine Health and the insurance sector. If you as an employer are marketing your job and your company, you should also be talking about the other sectors and the other industries and the other companies that exist around you, because you want that employee to feel good about coming to Maine, staying in Maine, and that they have ample places to land if this relationship doesn't work out.
And so was the rebrand primarily to try and fit that new design and that new mission of the organization that's going to be a year-round or holistic effort? I
don't think we had thought it that far out, but we knew we wanted different programming. We wanted the conference. We wanted founder-specific content. I had gone to a few of the Startup Boston conferences and this was a very fun thing that we did one time. We had leftover ticket money from the conference. And so everyone who was on the steering committee advisory board, we sent everyone to 2 conferences around the country to learn best practices about what else we could take home and try. So there was this really neat tech conference, Women in Tech conference someone went to in New Orleans. Someone went to South by Southwest. So we were just like, let's do a year of learning and taking home best practices. So we didn't know fully what we wanted to do, but we knew that we wanted to be a convener of the ecosystem players.
Exactly. I want to get to Live and Work in Maine, but we first want to make sure that we mention we had Sarah Smith here as coming for a speaker several months back. You ran the organization for almost 10 years and then had to start the planning for succession, knowing that you wanted to graduate or move on to somewhere else. How did that selection process go? What skills did you need to look for in a new leader? And how else can we support Sarah and talk her up now?
I love that. So there there was a moment where, there were many moments that I realized I felt splintered in how I was spending my time. And so even though Startup Maine was my baby, I either needed to, and I felt like I was half-assing both of them, to be honest. So I was like, I either need to do this full time, or I need to pick the lane of live and work in Maine. And soul searching, I don't know. I came to the decision that I wanted to stay and grow, live and work in Maine. I had met Sarah, and she was on my board for about 2 years. And she had a very different skill set. Has anyone heard of Teach for America, where they place you in a school? Well, it was called Venture for America. So you graduate college, they place you in a startup, in an up and coming startup community. So that's how she ended up in North Carolina, which is so cool because Charlotte was really growing. They became kind of like a fintech hub. So she was doing that. And then she went over to EY. So she was embedded in Ernst & Young within their equivalent of startup programming. And then she worked through this really cool company called Venture Fuel. And she was working with corporates and developing startup programming. And one of her clients was, I can't remember right now. I feel like I'm reciting her bio very well. And now I'm forgetting who she was building. Comcast. There we go, Comcast. And so she had this missing piece of, okay, she's worked in a larger ecosystem. She hasn't really fundraised before, but we can figure that out. And fundraising in Maine takes forever. So that will be a slow grind regardless. And she wanted to really hone in on what our offerings were and make it, and really put corporates to the test and put a little fire under their butts. So I think she had a very different skill set than me. I was sort of like, yay, say yes to everything. We can be everything for everyone. And then she was going to help us hone in. I think I was a really good builder for, 0 to 10. And then it was time, if we were going to grow, it needed to be handed off. And that was just a decision that I made. And Sarah was at the time looking for a job, and it worked out. So it was hard though. It was really hard emotionally. I don't think I was emotionally prepared for that whole transition. And even if somebody had coached me on that, I'm not sure I would have been fully prepared. But we are on the other side of it now, and I'm so thrilled and happy for her. And you can support her by, I think, encouraging her to do more across the state, but also to think bigger in what we need to move Maine forward.
Great. Well, if Startup Maine Week this year is any indicator of her work, good things to come. Big success.
Agreed.
Moving to live and work in Maine, can we just do a baseline for explain the organization, explain how it's structured, its mission, and the role you play?
Live and Work in Maine is a nonprofit. It is a private-public partnership, meaning that we are supported both by the private sector and the public sector. We are underwritten by Maine's employers. So some of Maine's larger employers cut us a check every year, and that helps underwrite our organization, our operational budget. We have also at times gone after state grants. There's RFPs, proposals that come out every now and then. We go after those. And so that's been some state funding that we've received. We received some money, for example, from the Finance Authority of Maine to promote Maine's student loan tax credit, which is very unique. And so we started because the tourism brand was so well recognized and did very, very well, but there were a handful of employers that were coming together saying, yes, we want people to visit Maine, but we also want people to live here. One of our founders had 3 kiddos and was like, how do I make sure that my kids come back here or stay here? So it really was an employer call to action. And we were somebody bought a URL and we were off to the races. It was a lot of guerrilla marketing tactic in the beginning to get our name out there, buying a ton of swag. I saw somebody still, one of our old cups is here. Somebody has a boomerang cup on their desk. I saw that. So it was a lot of just running around the state and getting to know all of the companies, the breweries, the restaurants, the co-working spaces, you name it. Very grassroots level approach to building the brand. And the call to action then became, okay, if people are on our website, what do they need? What do they want? They needed stories, they needed jobs. So we created a job board, only allow Maine jobs to be posted on there. And then we wanted to highlight a bunch of different industries because a lot of people, and we hear this from teachers, we hear this from our friends and colleagues at Junior Achievement and JMG, especially in the rural parts of Maine, they don't know what's going on or what's being built in other sectors in industry in Maine that make them feel safe and good about staying, either for higher education or for a full-time job. So we are trying to distill that. So we often act as a marketing firm. We deploy marketing campaigns in-state, out-of-state. We partner with groups. We did this really fun veteran recruitment campaign with Boots to Roots in Texas. We did a big billboard and digital media campaign in Texas trying to recruit military folks up to Maine. So you can think of us as Maine's cheerleaders, Maine's storyteller, but how we have started to talk about ourselves is that we're at the intersection of talent attraction and economic development.
Yeah.
And this is relatively new because there are a lot of groups like ours all across the country, but I've been able to kind of flutter around and meet a lot of them over the last few years. So it's been really cool to see what other states are doing.
Yeah, you mentioned coalition building earlier, and then hearing public-private partnerships sounds like a lot of coalition building. Can you talk about how that external partnerships mixed into the program?
When we started, which was under the LePage administration, we were earmarked a little bit of money, about like $100,000 each year for 5 years. So that went through LePage's administration and then into the Mills administration. So we had received support and funding through 2 different administrations. And oftentimes we are trying to work with different industry sectors. We did a big campaign where we were trying to get teachers to Maine. So we had to get to know the superintendents and help all of the really, really small towns get all of their jobs on our job board and try to figure out, okay, what are the pathways to get young people or new people to consider teaching in Maine? So we did a lot of stuff for teachers, and you have to work with certain groups there. And then right now we're doing a big project on the defense industry. There's a group that's come together called the Maine Defense Industry Alliance. And so they're trying to promote defense jobs. Essentially, you don't have to serve your country, you don't have to be in the military to go into the defense world. But I don't think folks necessarily know all of the manufacturing jobs and all the different training opportunities that we have. So they're a marketing partner in this effort, and they are also, they're utilizing our job board. So it was a great partnership. So we're always trying to have we never like to go at anything alone. Let's put it that way.
And I'm sure some companies are doing this better or worse, but I did hear you say at one point that companies need to sell more than a job. They need to sell the life, the experience of moving to Maine and what that does for them and their family. Can you talk about when you see that being done well? And you can call out any company you'd like if they're doing it well.
Yeah, I think sometimes I look at these job descriptions and I'm like, this is so boring, or it's just so dull. And I would love to see a little bit more of what's your culture at your organization? What's the community like? What do you encourage people to do? Do you encourage them to get on boards? Do you encourage them to, do you have something like bring your pet to work day? I don't know. I think that the more humanistic, is that a word? The more human that you make some of these job descriptions, the more hits that they get. I'll give a shout out to, this is a very niche, very, very niche example, but I think one of our marketing partners, Blaze Partners, when they have a job open, it's like a case study in how they go about sourcing to get people to apply. And they do a lot of these like day in a life things, and someone might do an Instagram takeover, or they show somebody literally who might have a similar job, talks about like, oh, I go to this workout class in the morning, and then I come to the office and I get to collaborate with all these people, and then this is what I do after work. I'm part of a knitting club, and I'm on this board. Like, they just show that you were allowed to be a full person at work. But then they're in the office, they're collaborating, they're working on really, really big campaigns. I think they add so many human touches to it, and it's very well done.
That's a great example.
I don't think some of the corporations, like Bath Iron Works, is not going to be able to do that, and that is a different story, a different case story. But I recognize that is not possible for everybody.
And coming from that, a lot of small companies that we work with at Dirigo Labs, they don't have dedicated HR programs. So are there any things that a small company without an HR program can do to leverage the way they attract new talent?
I have seen some very interesting models. So back in the day in Portland, there was 2 Degrees Portland. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that. It was very, very well done. So let's say you were curious about moving to Maine, particularly Portland. You got placed with somebody who maybe shared your interests or could just shed some light on how life worked in Maine. And so that person, it was a very informal introduction, but there was a matching process, and then they connected them with 2 or 3 other people. I think I would love to see, maybe there's like, if I were to dream big, you think about all these regional approaches or regional groups in the state. So we have KB Connect, we have we have this group called the Realize Maine Network. Let me back up. The Realize Maine Network is made up of all of these different young professional organizations. So the county has Momentum, Lewiston Auburn has Uplift, Portland has Propel, we have KB Connect here, right? I think.
Yep.
In Waterville, KB Connect. So imagine if there was a staff person at all of these places that could take inbounds, that could serve as a concierge and help with the inbounds. There's a few good examples. North Dakota has this Wayfinders program that if individuals are interested in moving to North Dakota, they essentially enter through their website, and then they get connected with real people, and it's very hands-on. Like, they know if somebody is going to come to North Dakota, we are going to have to hold their hand the whole way and help them make this process easier. And yes, we're not going to get 30,000 people that way, but it is one tactic that is going to help get people here. It has to be a little bit more hands-on, and we don't need 1 million people, so we can do that.
So on that topic of concierge service, new employee, is there anything in the first 90 days that you see, if these things are happening, it's most likely that person, that family will stay?
You have to make it very sticky. They have to, I'm going to be totally generalizing here, but if somebody moves and they have the anchor job, and then it takes a while for the spouse to find a job, I think there needs to be way more help of, okay, employers could come together and say, I landed this one person, their spouse needs a job, who can help? They need to be able to find other families, friends, and you have to help people find their people, or they will not stay somewhere. So it's almost like this is where HR, the lines have started to bleed, because back in the day, it used to just be like, here's your employee handbook, like, here are your benefits, go. But now employees have questions on, how do I find a doctor? How do I find childcare? Can I sign up for a board? How do I get involved in board service? How do I do this? How do I do this? Like, they want the real life stuff that happens outside of work. And often employers don't have those kinds of resources available. So we are trying to build those out. We are trying to say, okay, employers, send them our way. Like, we'll highlight events. We'll point them to different resources so that they feel like they're at least getting something to help them embed in a community.
Excellent. And we were talking about data a little bit before and how your organization uses it. To that end, can you talk to us about the metrics of success that you use internally? Yes.
So we've really come a bit further on this topic. And this has been so helpful, because when I go to this conference every year, I've gone the past 4 years, it's essentially groups like ours get together from all across the country. And then we as a industry have determined what our metrics are. So first year we went to Flint, Michigan, which, mind you, imagine going to Flint. Like, they not only had a talent loss, but they have a PR issue. So they were trying to combat 2 very difficult things. We went to Fargo, North Dakota, we went to Cleveland, and recently we went to Buffalo. And so we get together and we talk about metrics, like, okay, how are you measuring metrics? A lot of it does come down to, I'll call it the marketing stuff. How many eyeballs, how many clicks, how many people are downloading the QR codes? Okay, if you're promoting the student loan tax credit, how many of them have downloaded the worksheet. We can see this number of people in 2025 took advantage of the student loan tax credit, and in 2026, this number does. So we can report that back to the Maine Revenue Services. So since we are promoting the tax credit, we can see, we need MRS, Maine Revenue Services, to give us the data, but we can see the metrics there. And then the marketing campaign stuff is tricky because it's so fluffy. If anyone's done a marketing push, it's like, how many clicks? What did that actually result in? Like, people tell us all the time that, here's a great example that I'm like, how do I capture this? Because so many people will say, oh, I came home for a visit and I saw your ads in the Jetport and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna move back to Maine. Okay, then that's so amazing. We have so many stories like that, but there's no capture in that. So it's like a slow process. However, there are some employers that do very well. We have our job board. We scrape a ton of jobs onto the job board every single day. Maine Health, as an example. So all of their jobs show up on our job board, and they've told us year over year, the past 5-6 years, that we deliver them more candidates that apply and then get hired at Maine Health compared to LinkedIn and Indeed. But they are tracking that because they make sure when they're interviewing an applicant, they say, where did you see the job, learn about the job, and people select or say live and work in Maine. They capture that. We're a success node for them.
It's complicated.
It is, and then you have to rely on employers to give you back this data.
Right.
And not everyone does it, but the job board only costs $2,500 a year. They might pay someone $15,000 for a reload benefit. So $2,500 to be on our job board is nothing for a company like that.
Sure.
But they have so many more tracking mechanisms. So maybe with something with AI, there could be even more that we'll be able to measure and track soon.
Well, if you say it in this room, somebody's going to end up starting it. So just give it a few weeks.
We are, we are in chats with some interesting on the job board front of getting way more data and having a lot more capabilities. So we haven't, it's not public yet, but we will be hopefully.
So I'm curious about the national conferences.
Yeah.
Going back to those, can you give any examples of states that are doing things that are particularly interesting or some best practices?
So going back to what I said when we're a private-public partnership, there's pros and cons to that. We are not funded, therefore not a priority at the state level, because some states, Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan, North Dakota, they are funded at the state, at the top. So it's either a governor's pet project or it's embedded in their equivalent of DECD or Department of Commerce. So in Michigan, they have a really interesting program. They have a, I would call it a tourism, but also a talent attraction campaign called You Can in Michigan. And talent attraction, tourism attraction, and business attraction are all at the top. And then money is sort of funneled down into different regions. And so then there's different nodes within Michigan that it would be like Waterville having its own live work Waterville effort. But it's funded and then reported back up to at the state level. North Dakota, it's $6 million a year for 3 years dedicated to talent attraction efforts. So they're able to put some real dollars behind those concierges that I was mentioning, as well as a marketing campaign. And then sometimes you just have really big employers that lean in. In Florida, their campaign is wonderful, but it's Wonderful. And it's very, very well done. And it is underwritten by their equivalent of their big electric company. And so they don't even have to, it's I run around spending my time fundraising all the time. Their people don't even have to do that. Same with groups in Tulsa. And then in Cleveland, they have the Cleveland Tech Alliance, and they've decided to hone in, because there's money up top in Ohio. They have Jobs Ohio, which does something specific, and then that money then goes to, there's elements that go to Cleveland Tech Alliance, and they focus on 3 sectors: healthcare, IT jobs, and events manufacturing. So they've narrowed down on what kinds of jobs they're recruiting for. So there's just so many different models, and I think I've said this publicly to the folks at Maine Office of Tourism, but like Maine Office of Tourism gets 17 million a year about in their operating budget to recruit or to attract visitors to Maine. Why don't we just try to also send the same messaging to some of those tourists that like, we want them to live here and move here and be here. We can always get more tourists, but like, what if we converted some of the visitors? So they should just be a target market. I would love to see more, and we're working on it. I would love to see more collaboration on the talent and tourism messaging.
Just wrap the lobster rolls in job listings.
We're like, how do we get into Airbnbs? Like every time we go to an Airbnb, we take stuff and we leave it there. Like it's just like the three of us doing it. But like Ashley went to one for she had like her 30th birthday a few weeks ago, and she had an Airbnb somewhere in China, Maine, and she just left a bunch of Live Work Maine stuff. And we're like, hopefully they don't throw it away. But it's just, again, guerrilla marketing tactics that we deploy.
Great idea. So 10 years into this work,
Yeah.
Is there a widely accepted talent attraction method or strategy that kind of conclude doesn't work?
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work that you would warn some corporations against?
I think there's a few things. I've seen a lot of people or a lot of organizations either build a resource, build a tool, build something, and then have no marketing dollars behind it to actually get it out to the people that they want to see it. So when we've gone after RFPs, we've been very clear of like, okay, yep, we can build this toolkit, these resources, these brand assets and campaigns, but then we need a large chunk of money to do geo-targeting and deploy like an actual, like how do we had ads on Spotify and on YouTube TV and Hulu, like you gotta get the message constantly in front of people. So I think that's an issue that people don't have that chunk of money for marketing dollars. And the other thing is probably, I forgot. It was something around I think there needs to be more human elements to it. We can't just do a campaign. We can't just have like Live Work Maine in the Jetport, and then when people email us or if they see something, they need the follow-up step. Like you need a human. The number of questions that I answer and help people, almost like a concierge, to help them consider a place that they might want to live, I think is really important. There are some very active Facebook groups. If you go on them, you will cry a little bit because you'll be like, why are these Mainers being so mean to people that are trying to move here? Like they have one called, I think it's Moving to Maine, and someone will say like, I'm moving from Arkansas and I want to move to Bangor. And the people are just like, don't come here. You're not gonna like it. Your boots aren't gonna be warm enough. Like it's just like people are just like mean. And I'm like, okay, if I could just deploy nice people, maybe this could be more successful. But
some very nice AI bots.
Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes it's like So the human element, the concierge element is important, and we're actually going to hopefully be piloting something with a Rustic Partnership, which is a group in northern Maine in the county, and so they're just an interesting use case of how they're not going to get inundated with tens and tens of thousands of people. So how can we help them even be in touch with 1,000 people? Like how can we can actually measure the needle, or we can actually measure of what moved the needle there, because we will know everyone that we talked to or pointed their way. So we're working on some pilot programs.
Yeah, we've been in contact with it's going to be a startup, kind of similar to a Dirigo Labs up in the very tip of Maine. They're recruiting from across the border. They're going to Moncton and further out to Canada.
And trying to employ.
You got an idea? Come over here and start.
We should not turn away from Canada.
Yes, and so we've talked about the success of dedicated funding in other states. We talked about the success of a node network of like a Live Work water bill. If you're speaking to a room of state legislators, state representatives, is there any type of policy or public policy change you would recommend they look into in the next legislative session?
I do not mean to just keep repeating what I've heard over and over, but we cannot, we used to be able to ignore the topic of housing, and now we cannot. So when I've started to dabble in these conversations, and we've been trying to figure out where we play in this world, because we don't make housing, and we can advocate for it just like an employer might advocate for it, but like what can we do to actually have a meaningful impact? And sometimes it is taking the job seekers' stories and making sure that that is heard, as well as telling employers, like, you might need to band together to make your voices louder at the legislative level. I'm not going to, I know that certain things failed last year in the legislature, which was just, it was a real shame. It was everything about the modular homes and how they were being built out of state, and they were not allowed to be inspected by out of state inspectors. And so then all these projects that were in the works got totally kiboshed. And they didn't fix it in time. So now it has to go into this session. So just stuff like that. Like there are things that are in place that are definitely red tape that are making housing developments and projects for developers more burdensome and more expensive. Like I've heard some developers say, when you're trying to build a new complex, you're trying to build workforce housing, affordable housing, and every single space must have a sprinkler system, must be sprinkled. That adds, I don't know, $30,000 per unit to the cost, and it just becomes totally undoable. Now, how do you measure safety against what's practical? That's the question, but I do think that there are certain things that you should just be made a little bit easier in the government. This is not a housing related question, but I was chatting with this business owner up from northern Maine, and he gave the example of he's the guy that owns the new potato chip company, and he had this whole fleet of trucks, and he bought the trucks. He was sitting on, millions and millions of dollars of assets. He had to wait so long for the titles to physically be mailed from Augusta up to northern Maine, and he just lost a ton of money just like waiting for the titles to be mailed. Why can't we DocuSign that and print it? I don't understand. Like, I know I'm just speaking out of turn, but like little things like that, how could we improve efficiencies? I think would be a very interesting exercise.
I love those elegant solutions that can make a big impact, because that's not something somebody would necessarily think about immediately unless they were deep into the work. So,
and one other thing, that I went to a housing conversation in Freeport a few months ago. And it was tons of housing organizations. I felt like a fish out of water because they were speaking a language that I didn't quite understand. But they were giving somebody was telling the story of, or an example of, in Vermont, they have stamp approved 10. I don't know the word for, like, if you're building a house, if you're going to build a house, like a spec, what's that called? Like what is it?
It's a unit complex.
Like if I was going to make a house, build a house, like a blueprint.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. So depending on, in Vermont, they had 10 that were already stamped approved. Like you wouldn't have to go through the whole proposal planning process, planning board, because those were already approved. And so it saved them a ton of time when they were trying to build in some of these smaller communities. And it was sort of, I'm sure it took them a while to get there to make sure that some like very modern, weird thing was not going to be built in whatever town. But if we are truly short-staffed and we only have so many people, like certain people in code enforcement and fire inspectors, like how can we just make a process so that that kind of thing could be used in different towns in Maine? That probably is so way more complicated than how I'm making it seem, but the fact that Vermont did something like that, that's an interesting thing to look at.
absolutely. And got to the end of my question,
Okay.
but I want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything else about your work or thinking about how we attract the best talent and a vibrant workforce to Maine that we should be thinking about?
I am always open for ideas or a brainstorm. I mean, I only know what I know. I've lived in Portland, Westbrook, Bedford, and now Lewiston, Auburn. And so seeing how every town really goes about things differently, and they have a different culture. And so I remember once we put Bangor, we were trying to promote an area within Maine, and we put Bangor on the map, but it incorporated Brewer and Orono, and the town managers reached out to us and they're like, we're separate, we're very different than them. We don't want to be bucketed in that grouping. Understood. I think Maine is so special because we are so local. However, I do think that there is something to this regional approach that we have not cracked the code on yet. And so I would just love to explore that more. So truly, what does it look like? I mean, how do you get people, how does a group like ours spend money out of state, in state, whatever, get eyeballs in front of what we're doing, and then through data, analytics, just information gathering, learn enough about somebody that we point them in the direction of different communities, different types of employers where they might want to land. Like there is a path, there's a user journey, there is a pathway there's technology, and then getting them, the community members are the right messenger. I'm not always going to be the right messenger for every audience. If somebody is interested in Watermill, Maine, I want them to come to an event here. I want them to talk to you all. Like, you are going to be the sales folks, the people who are actually the right messenger. Mm-hmm. And so how do we get talent in front of individuals who can be down for a cup of coffee or have a Zoom meeting, have a call? It's going to need to be a little bit more personal, but I think it can be technology enabled, but then we need to hand it over to a human. So that's my thought.
Career fair or job fair for Dirigo Labs companies.
Yes, exactly. But how do we keep them?
Yes.
So, yes, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Katie. I'm going to open it up for questions if anybody here has any, but thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Thank you.